This is an encyclopedia. If you go and look for innovation, you're not going to find it. It talks about 3D printing, drones in skies, and it's pretty old.
1958.
Many of these things have been done before, but we lost the knowledge. I think a lot of people are mistaking innovation and creativity.
That's a problem. I remember we talked about this.
And then we have another issue because AI can create synthetic data. It's learning from human values based on human conversations, and I don't know whether that's going to be positive or negative. The world right now is reflecting a lot of dystopia.
Innovator, author, consultant, Melodena has 30 years of corporate and academic experience. Melodena is the founder of the Academy of International Business, which has been awarded the Dubai Brand Ambassador status by the Dubai Conventions and Events Bureau. Her latest book is AI-Enabled Business, a must for anyone working in the AI space.
I'm finding out right now a lot of tech companies are hiring back because the systems are not working the way it is and the knowledge is not there. But it's a technology, and history has always shown technologies will fail. They've created the Bricks and Road project with the new digital currency that they're using. You see these shifts happening around the world. So if we ask the right question, we can plan a better future. I don't want them to say, "Grandmom, was there really grass in your time?"
Hey, Melodena, it's been a few years now.
Yes, it is.
I was really excited, and listen, I have to give you credit for lots of things that happened in my life. And this is genuinely from my heart, right? One, when I used to work at Dubai World Trade Center, every time we cross paths and have coffee at the traders and other places, the discussions that I used to have with you were so impactful because it provokes the thought, especially when it comes to innovation and AI. Do you remember that?
I do.
And at the same time, during the deepest, darkest levels of my doctoral studies, you actually offered to help me, and you actually read my first drafts of my thesis and provided feedback just like that. And that feedback was so, how do I say it? It put me back on track at a time. If you remember, I was actually very lost. So I have to give you credit for that. So really thank you from the bottom of my heart. I wanted to start with
my
this.
My pleasure. Please don't thank me.
It's true. It's true. I mean, certain people come across your life and, moments that actually are pivotal. And because of how life works, you just forget to appreciate and acknowledge. And then you go into this turmoil of life. And then you look back and say, hey, you know what? I must stop and think and ponder and acknowledge. And that's the meaning of everything, at least for me, right?
And pay it forward. I think that's how my life's also been ups and downs. And I think people have always turned up when I needed them the most. And then you keep paying it forward to the others. And I think collectively what we'll do is create better societies.
Exactly. And that's it. That's it. I think this is the essence of everything we're trying to do.
But I want to say one thing. I'm very proud of you on this new iteration. I mean, it's a big thing to become an entrepreneur, and you spoke about it, but you did it. And so congratulations on that. A lot of people speak, but don't do.
It's really scary. It's really difficult. But that's what makes it exciting, It's a journey, and I think now things become more meaningful. Before it was more mundane, but yeah, it is something that I was looking forward to it. I didn't know how to do it, but hey, you only know when you try, right?
Absolutely.
But listen, so this podcast, most of the viewers or all of the viewers are either leaders, CEOs, business owners, corporate leaders, investors. So talking about innovation in AI, which is the topic of today's podcast with you, what do you think the viewers need to know about AI and its current form, and why should they care, in your opinion?
Okay, so this is an interesting discussion. I've been thinking a lot about it. So first of all, AI is a technology. We all agree on that, right? And if we go to fundamentals, what is a technology? It's a tool to help humans make their life better. So we've now put AI in a box, what its purpose is supposed to be. Now, if it's a tool, then we know who the master is, correct? Mm-hmm. It should be the human being. Now, when we make the tool the master, then we have a little bit of a problem. So I think that's the first fundamental thing. We shouldn't lose sight of the purpose of what AI is supposed to do. And this has a bigger philosophical discussion because if it's a tool and the master is the human being, how many masters should it serve? right? And this becomes a complicated discussion because is it the few? And you see this with ownership of AI and where the profits go, or is it the many? And if we think the fundamental purpose for governments as an example, but big tech, because big tech and big companies, it's not just big tech that uses AI, it's large companies that use AI, right? You're using it for logistics or you're using it as a platform to manage your people. Then the question really becomes, how are you managing the tool and who are the people that you are serving, right? So I find this very interesting at this point. I thought coming out of COVID, we would see a lot more optimism in the world. We would see a lot more job security because COVID was very uncertain. There was job insecurity.
And it sort of united people, right?
It did, but the job insecurity is a critical issue because if you're young and let's say you want to take a house loan, how many years is that home loan? It's about 15, 20 years. So I need job security to know that I can take a loan and pay back my loan in 15, 20 years. If I don't know whether I will keep my job in 1 year or 2 years, and the metrics is not performance, I could be a great performer, but you'll come back and tell me AI does it better, so I need to get rid of you.
Right.
Then we have a fundamental challenge. And this is the philosophical part. I think leaders, governments need to have this discussion and try and put the tool back where it belongs in the box.
Wow. Okay. So it went philosophical too soon. So let me retract a bit, Melodena. So you're a professor,
yes,
an academic, a founder, a consultant, and an author. Let me read.
Oh, wow. You got my book.
Of course I did. The moment it was launched. So let me read something for you because this made preparing for this episode a lot easier. Right? So you said, so it's called AI-enabled business, a smart decision kit. I like the naming because it's about decision making for leaders, right? So you said within only a couple of years, the term artificial intelligence, AI, has become ubiquitous in all parts of business and society. But what does this mean for us? I like how you started with meaning, because if we don't know the meaning behind things, nothing matters. What does it mean for managers and entrepreneurs who operate their businesses with AI? What does it mean for software engineers whose AI impacts on business and society? What does it mean for customers and consumers who deal with products and services that are increasingly driven by AI? And for governments, I like how you just wrapped everything around governments that funded much of the early development and seen to be lagging in terms of its control and distribution of opportunity. So really interesting way of looking at it. So before we start talking about all of this stuff, tell me about your background. How did you stumble about, around innovation and AI, and where did its interest come from?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that. So my father was a scientist, right? And he began in Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, which is, and he did a lot of work on theoretical physics. So very, very different. I actually brought his thesis here. And I wanted to show you something. So this is published in 1969, and it's the cosmic electrons and their roles in astrophysics.
Oh, wow.
Now, the reason why I brought that is just for you to kind of understand my background comes from science. And by the way, I could never understand what my father was doing.
Theoretical physicist.
Yes.
Oh my God.
But I remember a few years back ago, someone had shown how a black hole looks in color.
Yes,
right?
I remember that.
And it was like taking over the internet. And this is the first time we can see what a black hole looks like. And I went back to my dad, and he was alive. He's not alive right now, but I said, Dad, see, they've done this. And he said, so what's new? We've always known that. The maths was never wrong. So the thing was, in 1969, some of the early work that they're doing is just on maths and trying to understand the universe. And they were able to predict things that today we are able to prove or to draw or to articulate or to visualize, right? And I think that's the whole science part of it. It's a journey. And when we do science, we're standing on the shoulders of somebody else. Artificial intelligence is exactly the same thing. It's standing on the shoulders of somebody else. It could have started with the terminology that came in 1956, or could have started with simple calculation machines. Or if you even look further, you look at programming, it started with the Jacquard loom, where they were programming how to weave using machines, right? So it's an incremental process. And I think it is very important to understand that. And it's incremental because we learn what works, what doesn't work. We try to make it better. We try to make it faster. We try to do it for a certain reason. So I think my interest came from my early years of growing up. It's peaked when I was invited to join the IEEE for a couple of committees. IEEE is the largest association of engineers. And some of the early work that we did was on the education committee, and it was clear even software engineers were struggling with AI governance and ethics. So we thought, even when experts are struggling with it, how is everyone else supposed to understand, even people who aren't experts? And that's the journey.
This is how it started.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was from home, from your father, and then that's crazy. So you started with innovation. So when was innovation specifically of interest to you? So science, generally speaking, coming from your father as a theoretical physicist, but innovation specifically?
I think it's always been there at the background. So I brought something else that I want to go and show to you. So this is an encyclopedia.
Okay.
Now, when I was a child, if you wanted to find information, you had to look for it in books. Right? Or you had to go to the library, old school days. If you were really lucky, there was one source that had everything. Not the internet, but it was called the encyclopedia.
Yep.
And I have an early encyclopedia. It's a 1976 edition, right? And if you go and look for innovation...
That's pretty small for an encyclopedia, isn't it?
It's like 24 volumes.
Oh, okay.
But it's done alphabetically, and if you try to find innovation, you're not going to find it.
Oh, really? Okay.
So in 1976, it wasn't really a very popular word, enough to be in an encyclopedia. But what is there is inventions. So I'd ask you to open up inventions. And what you might find is actually what the current inventions were at that particular time, right?
Okay. So it was, obviously inventions is as old as time, right? But the word innovation or the concept
something much, much newer. So I think that's the thing. So if you're asking me when was I always involved, I think I've always been interested in something new, curious about that. But I really started understanding innovations as a subject when I was invited by the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government to come here and take over the innovation management program. And so even though I was using it, I kind of understood a little bit more about the purpose of creating value. So we define innovation as something that is perceived as new that creates value for its users. So it's very important, the word users. It's not value for me, the owner. It's value for
which is the difference between probably an invention and innovation. So okay, let me act a bit ignorant here, because I want to make sure that this episode is kind of targeting everyone who knows or don't know about innovation. So you said innovation is I would paraphrase a novelty or something that targets the consumers, and you sort of underlined consumers. So what is innovation, specifically speaking, in layman terms?
It could be anything. It could be an idea. It could be a process, a way of doing things. It could be a product. It could be a service. And that's where it's so impactful, right? So if you've got a new idea and it's visionary, and when we look at some of the early space race, which was, I will go to the moon, and the technology did not exist at that time to put man safely on the moon. But that's what began this entire space exploration. So it was new. It caught everyone's imagination. People could see the value because it wasn't just about the Cold War, but they could see these new business opportunities coming in. They could see, and I think that's the important thing, right? The value. How do you showcase the value?
What does it mean to, let's say, managers and leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs, innovation as a practice or as a concept?
It should be a practice, because if I'm looking at it from a business management point of view, you've got a customer, but you've also got employees, right? You've got suppliers, you've got distributors. If all of them don't believe, and nowadays we tend to focus more on the shareholders, I think that is a little bit of problem. You can see currently right now how the shares are fluctuating.
Yep.
One day high optimism, next day doom and gloom. That's not any way you can run a business if your future perspective is doom and gloom within 24 hours. So your real users or your real stakeholders will be your employees. And we have seen companies who have given shares to their employees
Yep.
and done fantastically well, right?
Yep.
Like even here in our neighborhood, look at Kareem, right, as an
Yep.
example. So you want to look at your employees because they have the staying power to stay with you. If you have a vision for 15 years, they will invest for 15 years with you. You want to look at your distributors and suppliers because it's the ecosystem.
Yep.
When the tsunami came and wiped out the supply chain for Toyota, and 80% of their supply chain was wiped out, they went and told their employees, you have two options. I fire 50% of you, or I keep you and you work alternate days at 50%, half the salary. And what they went and told their employees is, we as managers have taken a 50% cut. I love that. Leadership in action, right?
Yeah.
And the employees went away and discussed, and they thought that the employees will come back and say, fire 50%. But what they said is, no, we will take 50% cut also. And they said the funny thing was they didn't have to come to work every day, but they came to work every day. And we said, we don't have work for you. So they said, okay, let's work on making things better. And if we could sell the same part to our supplier, but it's cheaper, so he can keep the profit difference and therefore rebuild because they have lost everything. Let's do that. And that's what they did, So you share the wealth with the ecosystem and it comes back to you. I think that's really, really important.
That's innovation, leadership, creativity in action together. So for the average, let's say, corporate leader who is grappling with the word innovation, I want to double down on the word innovation because it's overused. I mean, I blame all of those media and others to use innovation on everything, to the point that if you ask people, everybody wants innovation, but only 10% recognize it or are able to actually pursue it. Why is that? What's wrong with innovation?
I don't think anything's wrong with innovation. Like you said, I think it's a perception gap, right? So I think a lot of people are mistaking innovation and creativity. They're not the same thing because when you look at innovation, when you look at creativity, there's no barriers. You like it. It's great because you can leverage it for innovation. But innovation is context specific. What problem are you solving? A lot of people catch the wrong problem. So innovation starts with a creative diversity of thinking on understanding what problem you're solving and why, right? We want to kind of understand, even when we're solving a problem, is it an old problem? Is it a new problem? Very often the problems we're solving are not new. They are old problems. And I want to show you something else, right? Yeah. So these are old magazines, which I really, really like. And this was, for example, a magazine that says, can plane collisions be avoided? Right? And it's pretty old. I think it's
1958.
Right.
Oh, wow.
It talks about what's next in automobiles, right?
Yeah.
If you saw the Jetsons, you know that they've also envisioned things like 3D printing and, drones in skies, if we want to call that, right? So many of these things have been done before, but we lost the knowledge, either because the books are obsolete, because the people who had that knowledge are obsolete, and because we never valued the knowledge. And again, AI cannot capture everything. Most of our knowledge is in our head, right? They say what is written is not even 20% of what's in our head. So when we depend, and we see, my worry right now is a generation that's depending on ChatGPT.
Yes.
So when we're depending on codified knowledge, the danger is we have not understood that there could be much more valuable knowledge somewhere else. And I'll just give you an example. There was a plane that landed on the River Hudson.
Okay.
Pilot Scully, if you've...
Yes, of course.
And, he says...
There's a movie about it as well, yeah.
Exactly. And he was actually blamed because all the AI tools said, no, he needs to go to the airport. And he said, there's no way I can reach the airport. We don't have enough fuel, so I'm going to do a belly landing. And they were like, this is high risk. You could kill everybody. And he survived, and everybody survived. But initially, it was like, should we punish him because he didn't listen? And he said something very interesting. So he had flown older planes where he understood the mechanics of the planes and he understood the machine. So he could understand his machine when all systems failed. Right? Do we have those skills any longer? And that was an interesting discussion I saw recently on Twitter where they said, even if we want to bring manufacturing back to US, the skills are not there. We don't have the tooling, for example. All of the tooling is in Europe or other countries. The people who manage the tooling, the skills are not there. So we don't want to lose the knowledge with these new tools, but I fear at the speed at which we're going, we may be losing critical knowledge.
Exactly. I mean, so you touch on a very, very important point, and that's the kind of segue between innovation and AI. Innovation is, you mentioned 3 concepts, so I'll just double on that a little bit and then jump into AI. So you mentioned creativity, you mentioned problem solving, and you mentioned inventions. And all these 3 together come up with innovation. So you start with creativity, but then creativity, if it's not solving a problem, then it's that creativity. But if creativity is solving a problem and benefiting a consumer or an end user or someone who will actually benefit from solving this problem, because there are problems that even if you solve them, it's irrelevant, no one cares. But if it's solving actual problem and elevates people's lives and lifestyles, then that's innovation. People are willing to acquire that piece of innovation to enhance and advance their lives. And that's the concept of innovation. It's very similar to, or let's say the process of it reminds me of design thinking, would you say?
Yes. So I would say we need a mindset change. So you need mental agility for innovation because failure is part of it, right? You can't always succeed, but if you have an organizational culture that punishes failure, that's a challenge because you then tell people it's not okay to take a risk. And then
Which part? So this is the creativity part.
I would say it's a running thread,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And then the other part is not just that you punish people for failure, then they don't tell you the lessons of what they've learned. So basically, the organizations are doomed to repeat the same mistake again and again because you only want to show what worked, but not what didn't work, right? So I think it's very complicated. If you truly want to build an innovative organization, you need a mindset change where you accept failure, you accept diversity of thought, right? So that means I put something out there, it's working, but then the context changes, it's not working. So it's not a failure technically, but the context has changed and I need to go back and reassess, reevaluate. But what happens is we treat it like the elephant in the room and it becomes too big to fail. So we keep dumping more money and more money and more money. And then we think, oh my God, maybe it will work. I just have to crack the code.
Well, and people will be afraid to actually voice out any issues because otherwise they're failure. And so, okay, that's interesting. So you linked leadership, culture, and innovation together. How are they connected, in your opinion? I mean, you mentioned that leaders will give people the safety of failing and obviously risk-taking, and that is the formula for innovation. Without that, innovation cannot happen?
I do believe so. So I want to give one more example. A lot of the fruits of today's labor were sown 40 years back ago. Right?
How so?
That's how research works. So it
Wow.
comes from basic research. So if you take mRNA vaccines, which we have so much hope on, we're hoping currently it will cure cancer and, so many of the genetic diseases. From that technology, you have to go back 40 years back ago and you have to look at, how they decoded the DNA gene, how they found out how medicines work or how you can transport these things, how you develop CRISPR. So there's so much of disciplines coming together. And that's where I said governments actually fund. But today,
Because no corporate will be able to fund that.
because it's long term.
Yeah.
And it's theoretical. It's like my dad saying,
Yeah.
many years back ago, this is what it looks like. And I wanted to show something. So my dad actually started with balloon flights. So this is just, this is a picture and it shows balloon flights, right? And the instrumentation was huge. They couldn't collect data in those days. So they would send these instruments up into the atmosphere to collect data and then bring it down. Technology changed. We now have satellites who can do that with less interference, right? So you've got to understand we are, again, building things today on the backs of somebody else. And if you don't put money into those fundamental building blocks, we're going to have a very shaky foundation. And I think that's the most important thing. Nanotechnology began with a theoretical paper. And Richard Feynman, he was a popular physicist. And I have 2 of his books that my dad used to use, and it's lectures on physics. Again, from 1960s.
Feynman, wow.
Okay. But he wrote a paper and said, why can't we have, he talked about the fundamental structure at creating things at level of an atom. And that's how so much of investment came into nanotechnology. In Germany, they called the industries and said, can we use this new technology? And the paint industry said we could. The pharma industry said we could. The automobile industry said we could. And it took a 30, 40 years journey, right? We need to also have that. So I think it's great. We're depending entirely on one particular tool to spur the creativity. But creativity, and I want to come back over that thinking is so critical to encourage research. And if we don't have that, that's a problem. Microsoft just recently released a paper on generative AI, and they found critical thinking skills actually go down if you use it too much.
For humans.
For humans. And I think, to be fair, if you have the experience and you're using generative AI, you have the knowledge to critically assess it. If you have zero experience and you're using generative AI, how will you critically assess it?
At all, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like someone who has I remember I used to have back problems back in the days, and my therapist said, don't use one of those back supporters, because what will happen is you'll rely on them and your muscles will rely on them and your muscles will actually become weaker and weaker. No. You have to work out. You have to develop the muscles to make yourself stronger. Then if you want to occasionally rely on them, that's fine. But otherwise, be aware that if you rely on them, you're relying on them, which shrinks your muscle. And I want to talk about how. So one of the people that I listen to when it comes to AI is, I don't know if you know him, Mo Gaudat. He is one of the lead AI experts. He used to work with Google, and I'm trying to get him on the show as well here. And he thinks something differently. He thinks that AI now, it's becoming more creative in a dangerous way, and it can actually replace human creativity. What do you feel about that?
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, so I want to, because we're talking about innovation.
Yeah.
If I create a patent, how many years can I safeguard my invention?
It depends on the industry, right? Yeah. So if
let's say 15 to 20 years.
If it's pharmaceutical, probably,
Okay.
yeah.
If I have a copyright, how many years is it supposedly protected?
How many? 3 years?
It's supposed to be 50 to 75
Okay.
years from the time of making, and it's got some even after death,
Okay.
right? Currently, how much is a copyright worth? If you're doing the image generator or anything, it's worth nothing,
Right.
right? So I feel we have a fundamental problem on that entire thing. So if we created these rules for copyrights and for patents, why is a copyright worth nothing right now? And it's creative right now because it's using copyrighted material.
Yes, the data sets are actually. I have a friend of mine who's developing. It's a startup who's developing his own AI, and I asked him, "Where do you get the data set from?" And he got actually shaken. He's like, "Oh no, I can't talk about this." I was like, "Why?" Because the data set that's been feeding his own AI is, I think, something that he doesn't want to declare because it has these sort of copyrighted materials. And then when the AI knows about it, how would you be able to tell if it's copyrighted or not? That's a problem. I remember we talked about this many years ago.
And then we have another issue because AI can create synthetic data. But synthetic data today, again, if it's tracking me and it doesn't know me because 80% of me is not codified, is it really representative of me? Right? So we have some challenges that are there. So at this point, it is extremely creative because it's got so much of the world's knowledge at its fingertips. It is actively pulling in things like audiovisuals and feeding that into. So yes, it is creative. But if no one's putting back into it And they have done experiments where synthetic data feeds synthetic data, and those AI systems collapse after some time because I think it doesn't yet have human creativity.
So, okay. How does this impact the business owner and their clients? Because, one thing is ethics, but in a capitalist environment where, solving problems for money, as it should be, because it has to be sustained, how do we grapple with that? I mean, I know you're a proponent of how governments should be able to put, compliance and governance around how AI is used, but where do these businesses fit into this formula of ethics and AI and copyrighted materials and the use of AI generally speaking?
Oh, that's a tough one, right? Because it comes back down to values. What values do you have? If you're going to misappropriate, I could use the word steal, then that's your value. But then you should not be afraid if someone does that to you too.
But no. Here's a thought, because there's a few books about how to be a creative person, and it's always saying, and there's a book I think called Steal Like an Artist, which is just study others, copy them, put things together. And many people would argue that art is actually understanding few things and then putting them together, and that's something new. Isn't this what AI is doing?
So the scale at which it does is not doing it like how it. So in the past, if I wanted to copy Da Vinci, for example, I would have to learn the technique and put in some effort to do that, right? But I couldn't do, 1 million reproductions at the same time. We're talking about millions and millions with AI currently right now,
Yes.
right? That is one issue. But the issue is then it's creating synthetic data, which then goes back and feeds the system. So at what point does that synthetic data then start affecting the system, right? It's because we know now there's trends. So you came back to a very interesting question. What should I do as a business owner? I think, first, be very clear what your value is. I don't know what it is. I'm not criticizing or anything like that because I understand. I use AI technology. So I'm not saying, I love the convenience of an Uber or a Careem or a Talabat. They use AI. We book tickets, we choose prices. So we use a lot of AI technologies, right? But be mindful of its impact, right? And then that's where the values come in. If the impact is going to remove jobs, ask yourself which jobs and where and how can I preserve them. So don't be in a hurry to say, I'll get rid of all my customer service people because now I'm going to use a chatbot. But 90% of the people hate the chatbot.
Yes.
You hate it too. The reason, and when you ask a survey how well it's doing, it's only because 5% stayed with the chatbot, got their answer, and they're answering. So it's 5 out of 5 are saying it's fantastic, but you haven't got the answer from the 95 who haven't answered, right?
Yeah.
So be very honest on that. If the chatbot is creating, jobs for 10,000 people, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Even if they're at the lower income level. If you feel it's going to preserve skills for the future, so especially if you're in the technology sector, and I think this is an interesting thing, I can now code and I don't need coders. But when there's a mistake, I need a coder.
Yeah.
Because only they can understand the bug.
Or you don't need 10 coders, probably 2 will do.
But they need to be good. But how do I create the pipeline if I don't have the younger ones? So I can't get rid of middle management. They have a lot of knowledge. The top management, and I'm not saying keep all of them, but I'm saying the top management have a lot of historical information, which is important. And I also need the young generation to learn going through the levels because that's where the expertise comes in. If you look at the wisdom pyramid, comes with time, right? Yes. So I need to create the pipeline of talent. But if I'm suddenly going to say I'm going to go and get rid of 50% of X level because, you know what, it's going to cost me a lot of money, I'm finding out right now a lot of tech companies are hiring back that level.
Because they fired too soon, too early.
Because the systems are not working the way it is and the knowledge is not there. But it's a technology. And history has always shown technologies will fail. They're machines.
Yeah.
There's
also the reliability and validity.
There's this wonderful paper that's just come out on generative AI, and it shows, the human brain, and it shows where generative AI is taking place. And you look at it, it's like 50 or 60 different types of technologies there. And that's the important thing. My human brain can do everything in a second, in a blink. But for the computer, I need 50, 60 of them together to work jointly together. And every time it needs to work jointly together, there's an interoperability issue, there's a data issue, there's a privacy issue. There's so many issues. So it will fail. The question is when and how, and what is going to be the impact. And that's where the values come in, is you've got to decide those questions. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying we need an oversight on that.
Yeah, you don't just jump the gun without just being mindful.
Without a deep reflection.
Yeah. So you mentioned values, and you mentioned critical thinking, which are two ends, I would say, on a spectrum of how you deal with decisions, right? Critical thinking and values. Because critical thinking can be, okay, what's good for my business? What can, generate more revenue, lower customer acquisition costs, etc., sustainability from a business perspective. And then values is the human element, the ethics, the morality behind my decisions, right? Where does education fall into between this and that? And
it's a huge, huge level. So what's missing currently right now from education, and this is a reflection talking to colleagues all around the world, is philosophy. What we have done is pulled out social sciences and put a very huge emphasis on STEM.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that, but the problem is the social sciences gives you the debates and the governance aspects and the ethics and the values, right? So if you pull that out too early, then people don't understand that. And I think also we've got to understand history.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're doomed to repeat
from a meaningful perspective. Yes.
Or we will repeat the same mistakes again and again. And
or maybe it's on purpose. Maybe people are doing it from an education perspective on purpose. And this is where now it's incumbent on teachers individually, but also on parents to educate their kids. I mean, I have a 16-year-old who's doing her IGCSE now. And before she comes to me, and I asked her explicitly, have you asked ChatGPT? Have you asked Grok, or have you asked multiple AIs? See what they say, bring their answer and critique it for me. And the more I'm doing this, the more I'm finding the flaws and the inaccuracies and the validity issues with AI on her own.
And I think that's brilliant, because that's what you want, is for that critical thinking, right? I don't accept the first answer that comes out to me. I kind of go and say, what other information is there? I ask other people their points of view.
Yeah.
I think this is great value from a business point of view. I think this is great value, but I go and ask people, do you really think this is? It will save me a lot of heartache. 75 to 80% of new business ideas fail, right? So I can save myself a lot of heartache by just talking to people. I don't mean on Facebook or anything else, actually meeting them, because people don't normally tell you the truth. Or we're very polite, depends culturally. So if you come and ask me, Melodena, what do you think of this? My first response will be, oh, that's really great, right?
Yep.
Because I'm being polite. But if you really sit with me and if I know you really well, I might actually give you my honest feedback. So that's earned, but that's earned by you making a relationship with me. If I have no relationship with my customers because they are faceless, numberless things,
yes.
I have no relationship with my providers, my distributors, my suppliers, because they are a number in that entire system, it's going to be a bit of a problem, I think.
So here's a thought. In our part of the world, and I always say this, is we have I wouldn't say an issue, but we have a challenge when it comes to this type of thinking. I would say critical thinking, trying to go into a healthy debate, positive friction, simply because of the culture. And I'm talking about the general block of land, not specific nation, just us as this part of the world, right? We don't like confrontation. And that's why we have the Inshallah culture. I keep on saying this on most of my talks. The Inshallah culture is, I will do it depending, because it's no. And I don't want to say no because I hate confrontation. And that's why I say Inshallah. Inshallah means no. At the same time, I hate failure, like you mentioned earlier, because I don't like to lose face, because my pride and ego is higher than me actually achieving something or learning something different. Now, when that comes in, when you have the ego, when you have the pride, when you have saving face, when you have, confrontation, avoidance, when you have all of those cultural traits, how can we grapple with critical thinking and positive debate?
I'm glad you asked that. So I moved here in 2004, and I was asked to teach at the University of Wollongong at that particular time, and I realized we were using management books from US and Australia. It was very frustrating for me seeing the region, and at that time I was interested in Palestine and all these other areas, and you see it was so dynamic, and there was always these challenges, and
It's very charged, isn't it?
there were no answers in these books, right? And I remember having one of my first interviews with Fadi Gandour actually, and asking him, like, what do you do? Because the management books say if there is a crisis, a threat of a bomb or things like this, you close the operation and you send everyone home because your employee safety comes first. And he said, Melodena, they need food to eat. What we do is we create a network and a system where people will tell us where not to go. So we protect people, but the operation runs so we can ensure that they get salaries and they have food to eat. And I thought this was so brilliant. This is not in any management book. So I started writing case studies, right? And I would go to companies and say, can I document your case studies? And nobody wanted to talk about failure. But what I found out was if I changed it and said, can you tell me how you succeeded despite a setback? People spoke about it. So there's ways of framing failure. And that's one of the first things we do in class also is like, what are other words for failure, right? Why do we have to use a word like failure? I can talk about it as lessons learned in my journey of life.
Yes.
I can have so many other ways, but the more I document, A, it also gives me a reflection point. And two, it helps others who are going on their own path prevent the same mistakes. They will avoid those pitfalls simply because I have shared knowledge. And we're all about knowledge sharing, right?
Yes.
That's a huge mandate in the region. And I find over the years from 2004, there has been a shift. I would say I've distinctly seen a shift in what people talk about, which I find very, very positive.
It's very
empowering.
Yes, I agree. So I like that reframing of things, but that's very high level. I mean, for the average person, an employee, a manager at in an organization, like you said, if their leader is, I wouldn't say authoritarian in the traditional sense. I would say it in the respectful sense. Again, this part of the world in our region, spanning from Jordan to Saudi to UAE to Egypt, we have a certain respect for authority, and that's a good thing. It's sort of looking up at a patriarchal, respectful way. And that's actually working well for us. That's why we have safety. That's why we have the leadership of the organization and the nation looking after the people in the most benign, positive way. And its results speaking for itself. It's not just theoretical, right? But at the same time, how do we grapple with public discourse around certain sensitive topics? Now, again, it's not a topic that can be talked, so politics and religion probably, and for sure, needs to be handled only by those who are either scholarly or experts in it. It cannot be just something that can be done in a way that can disturb the public, generally speaking. But when it comes to business, economic discourse, and others, do we always need to reframe, or there's some sort of an educational element that has to go into how do we critically debate certain topics?
I think that's where the wisdom comes in, when to say what and where and when. And that is something that you learn through experience, but also by looking at others. So having in places like, I would say in places where you have different cultures, right? And this is not just here, by the way, it's anywhere in the world. I lived in Germany when we had a huge influx of refugees. I moved in 2015. There was 1 million people coming in. And I remember there was this like, what is a refugee? And I was this foreign lady, the only dark-skinned person in my village. And at that point, I was like, are they perceiving me as refugees also, right? So it's interesting. The discourse is always there. We're seeing this come up in Europe with the elections right now. We're seeing different factions. We see this in US. So I think the discourse always is there. There's two fundamental issues that we need to kind of understand. One is education, right? Education, if done properly, gives you tolerance. Because you understand diverse perspectives.
Especially the humanities part, right?
You understand diverse perspectives.
Yes.
The thing is, you don't have to agree with diverse perspectives, but you're tolerant to diverse perspectives.
I think the conflation between opinion and fact.
And social media has kind of aggravated it a little bit faster, right?
Yeah.
Today, with so many deep fakes, I mean, I'm a researcher. I sometimes look at something, it looks visually correct. I have to catch myself and research it a little bit more to find out if it's true or not. It's very hard. But we have no laws posting fake content on social media, for example. It's okay. Is that creativity when it's portrayed as news and it's spread somewhere? So I think it's a lot more challenging today. And so the ownership goes on education. So that critical thinking piece on parents and society, it's not a government's job. It's not a business job. Unless you are in the business of that, then you need to think again, what's okay, what's not okay, and put that in. And I think that's the whole discourse. We are at a point in time where the change is so rapid. Whether it's, and we're talking climate change, geopolitics, technological change, right? There's so many things happening right now. We don't have the experience on how to navigate that. For all I know, I keep telling my kids, I got these technologies at the same time you did. So I am learning with you because they once, but Mom, you never taught us. And I was like, I didn't know myself. Exactly. So sometimes I have to learn from my children, and they're much younger than me. And sometimes they're learning from me. So that's a huge change from the past where we only learned from our parents and what they said was the rule kind of thing. Is now I need to learn from my kids because I don't have the skills sometimes to navigate some of these newer things. I'm not even aware of them because I'm not on those sites. My kids tell me that. My students got me on Facebook first,
Wow.
So I have learned through the years that you need that kind of interaction, but that requires a different sort of person. And I come back, mental agility.
Complete mindset change, exactly. Because if you're thinking that because of the fact of your whatever, certificates, age, experience, titles, accreditation, then you should always be the source, then that's a mindset that will always hinder critical thinking and even public discourse or even debate. Because if you come at a place where, he's a 20-year-old, what do they know? I'm a 40, 50-year-old experienced researcher, academic. For sure, I know much more than they do. That's it. That blocks everything. And that goes also for organizations. I'm a leader, I'm the CEO, or I'm the director of this department. For sure, I know more. Whereas now your team might know far more than what you do by mere fact of them being exposed to certain elements of the business through internet and social media and AI that you don't do. So let's drill down on businesses. How do businesses grapple with that? I mean, is there a formula that you can think of that makes businesses?
I think it's just a debate, having that understanding, right? So I sit with young people, and on one hand, convenience is everything. So they want products that will make their life convenient, and maybe they don't want much social contact for the sake of doing it. They want their privacy, and that's an interesting change from the old days where you would go to your neighbor's house for a cup of tea. And they don't want that unless it's on their time, their terms. But if you think it's important for society, so from the long term, you think that the pandemic of loneliness is coming and maybe the social fabric is breaking, so you need contact, then you build your systems around that. And you have that healthy debate with the young people, right? You have that debate, you get them to buy in, you experiment. And this is where prototyping becomes, you prototype within a small environment, see how it works, and then you scale. That's a good way of doing business. We have now reached a point where we scale immediately without prototyping. OpenAI is a great example. They've released it, 2 million people, and now it's too embedded to go and remove, right?
Yes.
But it should.
You can't. Yeah.
But Google and all said they had the technologies. They just never released it because they wanted to prototype it and test it in smaller. They didn't think it was.
Because there's the social element, the psychological element, the human element that cannot be tested.
But you can see the age difference between a CEO of Google and someone from OpenAI as an example.
But how do you cannot stop this, because now the AI war or anything related to development and innovation, I mean, now governments are really subordinates to this type of thinking. Because now, okay, let's say the UAE. The UAE said, you know what, we're going to put the brakes on AI. We have to prototype it. You have to go through the stages of testing and, all the kind of different elements of signing off from one stage to the other. And you have the experts in there. Boom, next day you have the next door country. You just released it. how do we?
I think it's unfair to say governments are responsible because it's businesses that are releasing it.
But would
There's
you
a
trust businesses?
So that's the interesting thing. It's the businesses that are releasing it, but it's the consumers that are adopting it, right? So we need a whole of society kind of change. I think it's not enough
How
to say
practical is that?
so let me ask you this. Have you ever had training when your daughter went to school on AI technologies?
No.
Maybe that's a great place to start. If you mandate, for example, every school must have parents sign off that they've understood that children should not be alone with, let's say, character AI, because we just saw a young 14-year-old boy commit suicide in US because he believed character AI. And the interesting thing is the AI never told him to commit suicide. The AI said, come join me. Right? I find that so fascinating because they had built the safeguards into character AI, should not talk about self-harm, never said the word. The child interpreted, come join me.
Why was AI blamed?
Because of the relationship the child had with the AI.
The
right?
unsupervised relationship the child had.
And the parent assumed the child was safe at home. The parent knew the child was home, spending more and more time, moving away from the friends. We all assume our home is a safe place.
Yeah.
But today we are in that unique situation where we have invited strangers to our home because of AI. There are many parents who allow their children to play games like Minecraft, thinking it's educational.
Yes.
And I'm not blaming, again, Minecraft or any Roblox or any of these games. They're good games if they're supervised, but parents allow their children to play with them unsupervised with players from other places without asking where the server is, who's vetted, the game, as an example. So I don't blame them because we've not taught them. But if we need a whole of society, maybe it starts at schools when children get enrolled at schools. That would be a great example. Maybe businesses have a day where they have these questions and, about technology, like, is Zoom keeping my records and what can it do with my records? Does it have access to my face and my voice? Because you just need 10 seconds of my audio visuals to now create a deep fake. So I would like to know that. And I want to know who has my back, but I don't know whom to ask. So I think the questions are a lot more where we have, and that's why the book was written. It's if you're taking a decision on AI, and maybe you're taking a decision to embed a part of AI into your organization, ask the right questions. Ask the right questions to your suppliers. Because if we don't ask the right questions,
experts and consultants who know this stuff. Yeah.
There's no incentive for a business to create a better system.
What do you mean?
If I don't ask the right questions, why are you using my data? Then they won't create that option of opt-in, opt-out. So you need to ask the questions so that they create better systems. But if you don't ask the questions, there is no incentive, right?
But if capitalism have taught us anything, is that businesses cannot be trusted, isn't it?
I don't think that's necessarily true.
Okay.
We do know that business, and if you see the Edelman survey, we see businesses worldwide are more trusted than governments, which is kind of interesting, except in the UAE and some places like that. Where I think
How valid is
China.
That? How valid is that?
I think it's pretty true, right? Do you still use an iPhone? What do you use? So you trust the business, right?
Well, okay. So convenience now is far more. So I'll tell you what, the reason why people are getting fatter and fatter is because of convenience, because of hedonic. We're hedonic creatures, right?
I know, but you trust. I trust an iPhone.
But why do I trust
technology? I
don't trust it because I know that it will not betray me. I trust it because, hey, you know what? Convenience. I'll tell you a small story. So I have a friend.
You could choose a Nokia or you could choose a Motorola.
Really?
Or see that's a level. You trust it more than you trust something else at this point.
But the trust is not coming from a place of, the trust is coming from a place of acceptance. The trust is coming from a place of, you know what, I know they're doing fishy things, but hey, I can't live without Google Maps. Google Maps have more convenience than me not using Google Maps, therefore it's fine. And that's the sentiment with people. I mean, you know that now there's the consent, and most people know what their data is being done with, and yet they are okay with it because they are accepting it.
So when I lived in European Union, what I really liked is they simplified consent, so it was it was just 3 sentences, either yes, no, and they could not take away services if you refused
But that's
to
why
give your
Europe
data.
now. But that's why Europe now is behind on almost all
And
metrics.
that's an interesting debate. Who sets these metrics up, right? I've
Economy.
met somebody
Dominance, hegemony.
Exactly. So I think that's an interesting debate. When I was in Germany, I met what they call the golden middle, right?
Right.
These are number 2, number 3 companies. They don't aspire to be number 1. They're quite happy there. I met a lot of startup founders who had fantastic products but didn't want to list on the stock market.
Yeah.
And their ambition was to be a small family-owned business and have families who they took really good care of. I think that's okay. That's the Patagonia model. Who says the only model needs to be you need to be $1 trillion company?
Of course not. Yeah.
So
a human ambition. Can you
but
put
see,
it?
these metrics are designed because we're assuming you need to be $1 trillion company. Because if
What metrics?
whatever metrics that you're using when you say, so if we change the metrics around and said, how many of these businesses, how many have the employees, what's their average length, and we use that as a metric in ESG rankings, or we looked at average salary, median salary versus board salary, I think you'd get very interesting perspectives over there, but we're not doing that. So it's not that we can't change, but we have to ask the right questions. If we ask the right questions, you create a shift, right? Again, on that whole debate with European Union and other places, I'm not really sure I agree with that totally. So on exports itself, European Union does 70% of its trades within EU, right? They do very little outside. Take a country like India, which has for years been secular and still has a lot of those elements inside. It will do well irrespective of tomorrow if something happens because it's not totally dependent on the rest of the world. Right. So I think you've got to kind of understand in this world, China's already saying that they've created the Bricks and Road project and the Belt and Road project and doing fantastically well with that. And now with the new digital currency that they're using and trade, you see these shifts happening around the world. So I think if we ask the right question, coming back to innovation, we can plan a better future. So innovation also requires us to do a little bit of future foresight, right? And what we are asking is don't just think about where the next buck is coming from.
Yeah.
Think about impact on people, because at the end of the day, most of our religions put people first.
Of course.
So think about people, think about the planet, because there is no other planet we can go. I mean, Mars is great, but I don't think we can take 6 billion people, 7 billion people to Mars. So this is the kind of place we're stuck in to live. And I don't think I'm going to face too many issues in my lifetime. I worry about my grandchildren, right? I don't want them to say, oh my God, grandmom, was there really grass in your time? Did you actually have fruit that you plucked from, the garden outside, or is everything grown inside a warehouse? You don't want that kind of. So if we sit and have a discussion on the values right now, we can build better systems, because I think everybody wants a better life, right? But we need to have those conversations with young startup founders, and young startup founders under tremendous pressure for profits. We know this, right?
By everyone, right?
Right. So
by investors, by their own partners, and that's what I want to say.
I don't think it's the small investor. I think it's the big investors that put that.
Yes,
right?
yes, I agree. But that's their life cycle when they go into.
You can change the stock market laws, can't you?
You could, but listen, I'm a very pragmatic person, but at the same time, I'm very spiritual, right? So everything you mentioned now is absolutely how things should be. We all aspire individually to be good, to be moral, to be righteous, to do, to make decisions that are not based purely on profit. But then we get hit by reality. I'm a startup who tries to be good, but then, and build my own AI and do all testing, and then boom, OpenAI started, and everything I've done for the past God knows how many years and all the investments is obsolete. And now I have all my investors, all my partners, everybody that knew about my project is knocking on my door and hammering me because I didn't do what OpenAI did. And guess what? I'm out of business. The thing is, being pragmatic sometimes pays off, even if you're not quote unquote moral. And by moral, I don't mean going and killing people and just turning a blind eye. I mean, we all heard the other day that viral video of that lady in Microsoft event where she just went and shouted at the VP of Microsoft for AI for supporting the genocide in Palestine. And yet people sleep at night. And again, you would think about the moral quandaries and the moral dilemmas that you would want people to think about, that you and I think about day in, day out. But then the pragmatism of how the world works is completely different. So, I mean, the thing is, are we going to be okay as human species with AI?
Yes, because we have an incredible ability to survive. So I think that's the main thing. AI is a technology that might work brilliantly and may not work brilliantly. Time will tell, right? And we will have lessons from that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not using the same cars we used 40, 50 years back ago. We have new types of vehicles. We're doing okay. But is the traffic worse? Are there more pedestrian killings? Yes. Are we okay with that? Unfortunately, yes. But it's convenience, right? But also there was a time when you never worked further than, I don't know, maybe 1 kilometer from work and you
Right.
walked to work. That's not the case any longer today. So we're seeing changes in society, and that's why I said systems thinking is such an important part of innovation, right? I want to come back to the issue you mentioned about pragmatism. If you are getting into the business, you need to survive and you need profits. The question is how you build those profits and from where they come in, right? And that's an individual choice, and you will make those choices. It may not matter when you are small, and let's say you trial tested for a small group. The problem comes when you scale. So I don't think it was an issue by itself, OpenAI releasing a component and it got accepted by 1 million. The problem is when you scale and you insist it's the right thing and you keep growing without understanding some of the guardrails you need to build in. At that point, it is not ignorance. You are doing it deliberately,
And
right?
that's the pragmatism of the world.
Yes. And I think large technology companies have choices to make because based on which country you're based in and things like that. So, and then as an employee, you make a choice when you join a company on when to speak and when not to speak. So there's all these very interesting, complex
variables and dynamics.
Exactly.
That play into the
right?
final.
These kind of things wouldn't have been in social media in the past. Like, right, today, everything is about a movement in social media, right? So I really feel like we are at this very, very difficult time where we have too much information and too little knowledge.
Yes.
Right? And that's the critical thinking piece.
We're smart, but not wise, right?
And that's also the challenge for any business leader is navigating that. And nothing we would have taught you in schools or universities will prepare you for this navigation of how do you navigate. So, I mean, unless you say in a meeting, put all your mobile phones away, but then you allow it because you hope maybe you're getting some good positive exposure on social media. So you don't know when it's going to flip, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. And I don't have an answer for that. Again, we're all learning on this together. But we are at that point where the technology adoption is so fast and so rapid, we need large-scale literacy. And that's where a lot of the dialogues are going to happen. I mean, I'm happy we're having this conversation, but it should be happening in every home.
Yes.
Right? Parents should be having this conversation with children. Parents should be having this conversation with their friends' parents. Because if you have a value and your friends' parents don't have the same value, and you send your child to their house to play, that is an opportunity for something to go wrong. It's the same thing with employees. You have employees coming from different value systems into your organization. Procter & Gamble spends years teaching culture in their organization. You become a P&G person because you are embedded in their culture. Small startups don't do that. And if your employee turnover is going to be at the pace of one every 2 years, 3 years, you're not building a culture.
Absolutely.
Culture
it needs at least 5 years.
Exactly. So again, I think those are things straight away, you know the answers. These are not new answers. They are old answers. But if you choose to go on the trend and say, okay, short term, let me fire X number of people because it pads up my financial bank sheet and it looks good for the shareholders. Well, you're going to have a cultural problem.
But then pragmatism hits because, I mean, one of the things, so I pride myself by controlling these things at home. So my daughters now, they're 14 and 16. Until this day, they don't have a mobile phone. Their access to internet is extremely controlled. Obviously, access to AI is absolutely monitored. Now, they're unlucky because I'm a techie person and I understand how things, and I'm always 2 steps ahead. But not everybody is as aware of technology and, tinker as I am. But at the same time, I'm still struggling. Because guess what? When they go to school, they're the only ones since the age of 8 that they don't have phones until today. Now, today is much easier conversation with them because now they understand. But prior, I had to go through hoops. Now, when everyone around you, literally everyone, is succumbing to the convenience problem, to the hedonic way of, you know what, let the nanny, and the new nanny is the iPad and the phone, and everyone around you is like that. Everyone.
And that's a tough one, and this is me as a parent. So I have 2 kids, and I remember one of the hardest things I had to do was make them believe in their own self-worth so that they could go to school and not care what others thought and be confident in that. And that, I think, is really, really hard. As a parent, you have to love your kids and you have to respect your kids, and you've got to bolster them up and create that self-confidence, because if they are confident in themselves, then they will not care what others think. But it's not easy. And I think that's again a learning kind of thing, right? For parents, for generations. But so it's a societal problem. If we don't solve it, society will continue to have issues as we keep going in, and you can fix it from the top. That's not going to help. Businesses will always find a way to exploit what consumers want.
That's what they do, exactly.
Consumers want convenience, and they want, like you said, and if we're training them on an iPad, so if you're introducing gamified learning in school too early, you're teaching them hedonism, right?
You're using that, for good purpose.
Because they're now doing the rewards, incentives, gamified kind of learning. So their brain is getting rewired like that. We have a new book called Anticipatory Governance. And one of the authors actually speaks about, AI in education, early childhood education, and the effect on brain. And I think this is so important. But I come back to that research piece. Where's the research papers on 0 to 8 years? And we know now brains develop much more than 8 years. That was the initial kind of dialogue on how it's rewiring brains. I mean,
the neuroplasticity and how things keep on developing.
Exactly. So if I train my kid rewards because he's doing gamepad and,
instant gratification, sort of that dopamine hit that
what he will want, and he will tend to gravitate, to social media or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, because he's getting that hit all the time.
And that's why we have, and I say this all the time to everyone I coach, I mentor, I work with, we have an extreme problem when it comes to consistency and discipline. Even someone who is actually at the top echelons of whatever, they have a problem with consistency and discipline because they are hooked and high on dopamine hits, even for the good reasons. And they're always motivated. Like, I know a friend of mine who's really, a leader in the organization. They say they can't pass a day without in the morning listening to some motivational YouTube on the way to work to be able to set him up for success for that day. And it's like, you actually do that? You know that this is actually, you're wiring your brain for dopamine hit in the morning through these motivational talks in the morning. What about discipline? What about consistency? What about you trying to have a choice and take ownership of that choice intrinsically, not extrinsically? And he didn't know what to say. He's like, but that's how I reward myself. And that's how I motivate myself. And I'm like, that's good. I mean, if it works for you, that's good. But then that's dangerous, because now everything that you do is extrinsically motivated, which is dangerous.
And that's the interesting thing. So we don't have enough, and for policy changes or things, people want research, right? We don't have enough research. I was in Turkey and a young man got up on stage and he said his best friend in the traffic, because they have a lot of traffic, sits and listens to Jarvis speak to him. So he has a character AI which is modeled after Jarvis, and he has conversations with him, and that's his best friend. And he said that word, best friend. So we're reaching a kind of point where people are seeking out artificial intelligence because it doesn't contradict with you. It mimics you. It seems like it gets you because it's just, playing off of what you like rather than representing the real world. And that sets you up for a little bit of a failure because the real world is complicated. People are complicated.
Yes.
I like you, but you like me, and there are going to be things that you don't like about me and I don't like about you, and we might have to have an argument or a disagreement, and we have to confront it. I can't block you and say I've canceled you or whatever.
We have to be okay. We have actually to seek it.
Right? So, but that entire process of how you do that is something that you learn through your childhood. I met a child in the lift in my building, and this is post-pandemic, and I said, "Oh, you have lots of friends to play here?" And she said, "I don't have any friends to play."
Oh my God.
The building. And for me, that was like,
That's
okay, but this post-pandemic, when the child's been, at home, gone to school, and now still, I guess, some remnants of post-pandemic over there. And I thought, oof, something's not right here, because if you've got to survive in this real world, even if you're dealing with an AI, there's people behind this. The services are not bought by an AI. It's people with the money that they earn that are buying it. I don't know if that will change in the future, where an AI agent will buy things on your behalf, but then you'll be lonely. Have you seen the movie Surrogate?
No.
It's a Bruce Willis film where
yes, I remember. Yeah,
everybody lives life through a AI bot, right? So we
have a lonely epidemic now, and it's getting increased day by day. People are getting more and more, like every time I walk into the elevator in my building, I say good morning, and I can see and I can attest to the change between 20 years ago and today, and how people are just willing. And by the way, the younger the people, the lower their tendency to actually open a conversation. The older they are, the more they're welcoming conversations. I can see it day in, day out in my own building, and I live on the highest floors, so I have enough time to open conversations. People don't want to do that. Even the simplest response to a good morning, it's a nod. Like not even their voices, they're able to kind of voice it out, and that's something that I think we're lucky that we're aware of it. I think we have an awareness epidemic, and that's something that's been exacerbated with AI. And like you said, people are considering AI as their friends, and sitting in their cubicles and working with their friends. But how do we control that? I mean, from an AI development perspective, let's talk about AI development, right? The OpenAIs of the world, the Microsofts of the world, the Googles of the world, and even the startups of the world. Is there a way to control AI development?
It's how you design. Everything is how you design, right? So,
but we can't leave it to businesses, right?
You can't. I mean, businesses themselves can have that discussion. So if it's important, then a business will say, well, so here's 5 recommendations. Why don't you ask 3 people and feed that in and tell me how it goes? So you can have that conversation, and you can choose to override, but it's still asking you to go and reach out to 3 different people. So you can do a lot of things. You can book an Uber, for example, and it could say, well, 3 people over here also want to book an Uber. Would you like to share? You could, right now, the option is I want to share, but it doesn't tell me that 3 people in my same neighborhood on the same street are looking for an Uber going in the same direction. I might change my mind and say I might, I don't know. So the thing is, you could build systems differently. The challenge is the privacy part. I remember years back ago, an airline, I'll not mention which one, was thinking about, well, people are spending 14 hours on a flight. Wouldn't it be really cool if I could see who were sitting over there and say, oh, Salma's over there. Let me start a conversation. We have something. And then we use the 14 hours for networking. That didn't work out because of the privacy conditions. Right. But if you could ask...
opt-in.
Exactly. If you had an opt-in, I still think it was a great idea. I'm spending 14 hours on a flight.
But then the extroverts of the world will rule the universe, and the introverts will just, go on the side.
The introverts will decide to chat.
Right.
Rather than
leave it to their choice. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Or you don't know. Or the introverts might have done the research paper and suddenly found their favorite author is there and start up a conversation. Right. If the author decided they wanted to kind of do that. And so there are many ways to network. I know His Highness Sheikh Hamdan is now looking at creating that community, which I think is fantastic. Right. But we all should want that, because if we all understand that the strength of any country is its social fabric, right?
Absolutely. And it
It's
starts with the family and then the community and then the
exactly.
tribe. Yeah.
And then everybody else, because if someone falls on the street, okay, I know during COVID we were a little bit worried, but if someone falls on the street and I rush to help them,
That's the thing. It becomes a second nature. I don't have to think about it because I'm already used to doing it at home, but then in my extended family and then
just
in my
think,
tribe. And then
because we have 180 countries here, if that's what we export to everywhere else, I mean, we become a healing power. The whole world would heal if we all feel the same way about things. The problem is because we're so worried. I don't know you. I don't know your culture. I don't know whether you resonate with me. So we're all like a little bit like, we're
there's
also
an apprehension. Yeah.
yes, especially when you meet people from different walks and backgrounds, right? We're not sure, or we mistake what people say. We're like, oh,
But we're afraid of rejection, right? That's the thing. If we accept rejection as it is, I mean, for me, again, I'm speaking on my behalf. I don't mind the rejections. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, I have to survive by accepting rejections because I get rejected more than I get accepted, and that's the nature of business. But in other ways of life, if we don't accept rejections, generally speaking, we'll always have this apprehension of, oh, what if they said no? And what if they gave me the side eye? And, and that's hurtful. But if you're not at peace with that pain, because it is painful, but if you're not at peace with that pain, expecting it, it's like going to the gym and expecting you won't be sore the next day. That doesn't work.
Yeah. I have a story from Germany. So when I went to Germany, and Germans are very frank, right? So I was
in a slightly uncomfortable way, but I like it. I like it because it's very pragmatic. It's what you see is what you get, right?
So I was like a co-dean of a university, and there was a meeting where everybody was yelling at everybody. I mean, very loud voices in German, and I'm Asian woman, so I was like, no, I don't think they mean this. So I was like trying to be the pacemaker. And one of my colleagues burst out laughing and said, Melodena, you're getting it all wrong. They're arguing about the idea, not about the person. We separate the idea from the person. Of course, not everybody does that, but that stayed with me a lot. When someone's disagreeing with a point of view, they're not disagreeing with me as Melodena as a person. They're disagreeing with the idea I put in. So my question should be, why do you disagree with me? What is wrong about the idea?
Become an inquirer immediately.
Yeah. Tell me more. I learned this from one of my students. She will always say, tell me more whenever we said something. And I think that's such a good thing, right? If I can separate the two and then I go, okay, this is not about me. If I have to take a tough decision. So in our role, we take tough decisions. You have to fire people,
yes.
right? So those are not easy. You take it because it's a business decision or it's a decision that is recommended from higher up from you and you have to execute. But if I do everything afterwards to help that person find a job, if I'm sitting with them, then I have my values still intact, right? So how you do that matters. So I think that whole discussion you talked about pragmatism,
like
I'm not talking about not taking tough decisions. I understand that you can, but you can be a good person too, right? And if you're a good person, I think you build good communities. And when you build good communities, people reward you. I still think there are some companies we put really high on our list of ethical companies. And we look at that. The companies that were considered very high and sort of the halo has slipped, it's because they've changed their culture.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe the employees are not feeling the same way, but you've also not built your culture with your employees. You've kind of let that go to tools and things
you
like
were
that.
not deliberate about it.
Exactly. So I think these are things we need to go back to fundamentals. The people have not changed. The tools have changed.
Yeah.
We are the same people.
But the tools exploit the darkest sides of people. Because guess what? If you're like in Dubai, for example, I always argue that driving is bad because people have tinted glass. Because people don't see who's inside the car. If everybody has their windows down and people can see people, they won't be as aggressive when they're driving, especially 7 a.m. in the morning when they're always rushing. And I have this experience almost daily. And I even have this idea of having this research in 10 cities around the world, just driving in the morning, taking videos and then analyzing the videos and seeing how people behave, especially when they want to kind of give turns at the junction.
So RTA is having a competition right now, I think, for students to go and like good behavior and to take videos and put them up.
Because you can have cameras, you can have laws, you can have, but then, like you said, morals and values are more important. But how can you police that? And if you do police it,
You
is it really
can't.
meaningful?
And there's two things. Why are people rushing? Is it because they have to go very far to go and they have very long hours? Can I be more tolerant for that? So I use, again, Germany, I drive at 150. Here, I'm 80 to 100. My kids laugh and they're like, you're like a grandmom. And I'm like, I don't have very far to go for work. So if someone's rushing, I let them go. And mentally, I keep telling myself they need to go to the toilet. So let them go. And it's been really great because my blood pressure goes down. Otherwise, I'm like really angry. And then I go, okay, they really need to go to the toilet. So
Yeah. But if you look at, so this is where you look at it obviously introspectively, and this is great. And if everyone does it, then obviously we'll be in a better place. But then if you look at it societally, it's a telltale of something else. Now, yes, you can remove the root cause, but then it's not practical. Because, it's like saying, I don't want to get sore. Okay, then don't work out. But that's not practical, right? The idea here is, how do you handle stress? Because stress is there. It's part of life. The idea, and you mentioned something really fascinating, and you said that, they are able to separate the idea from the person and they don't feel threatened. That's EQ. That's their emotional quotient being at the highest level when it comes to how they train their brains and how they build walls or being defensive when someone attacks them or attacks the idea. And they're clearly seeing these two. And that's my thesis. My thesis is we are going direct at critical thinking, at debating without even addressing what is emotional quotient and how we are able to teach people to say, no, be aware that they're attacking you as a person. And of course, you have to stand up for yourself, or they're attacking the idea. And that's completely different.
And also, but see, I think you also need to know culturally where you stand. I was in Germany, so that's their culture. It's fine. If you came here, that's not acceptable whatsoever, right? It would not be acceptable in Japan. It would not be acceptable in China, as an example. So it's the cultural awareness that you have is really, really critical. And if you are in international business, you cannot say, I did not know. Right? You have, and I think it's better to err on caution. I have lived here so many times, and sometimes I still make a mistake, and then I will say, please forgive me. I was not aware of
this.
But
is it a mistake?
It doesn't hurt for me to say, please, it's a mistake, right? Or I can say, don't use the word mistake if that's something I was not aware. Can you tell me what I should have done so I don't repeat it again? People appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
One of the challenges I will just give from my own background, I have lived in India, in UAE, in Germany, in US, in Taiwan. So culturally, I'm very familiar with many cultures.
Oh, wow. East and West, right? Still very hierarchical versus very confrontational.
Still, I will make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because I meet other people from different cultures. I perceive that they're American and I treat them like American, but maybe they are more, I don't know, Asian than they are in some ways. So you will constantly make mistakes. This is normal. This is human. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the ability to then go back and correct yourself. So if you keep doing it again and again and again, okay, you don't want to learn.
Yes.
Right? This is the learning
You mean
curve.
being attuned to the culture?
Yes, but if you make a mistake, it's okay. And
what if the culture is so pervasive that it stops you from having any meaningful discussions and you're always on the edge of your seat trying to think?
I think you can always have, but you have to build the trust, right? And that takes time. There's no AI for that. No AI is going to build you trust in 10 minutes. I'm sorry. If it is, it's lying. But people require time. I'll always ask that, who do you tell your secrets to? Your friend or to a total stranger?
Right.
Sometimes people choose strangers because they think it will go away and then they're never going to meet them again.
You don't have the judgment problem, right?
Exactly. And then you assume you're not going to meet them again. But hey, if they've got a camera and they've got AI, maybe that's not necessarily the case any longer, right? So you've got to be careful what you say, where and when. So a lot of this is, okay, so as a business leader, coming back, you're doing innovation, you want critical thinking. I saw one of your podcasts was on mentors. That's a great place to go and get
Yes.
critical thinking. You're not feeling comfortable maybe having this conversation with employees, having this conversation with your peers because you don't want to perceive yourself, get yourself perceived as being less than confident. Then choose your mentors wisely. Make sure they come from diverse backgrounds. They should be people who will not judge and have multiple conversations with these mentors. At least you're getting diversity of ideas back. There's many ways to do this. You don't have to do it only in one particular way. What is comfortable for you? And it depends whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Yes.
Some people may be comfortable putting it on X and doesn't care whether, like 100 people bash back at you. That's fine. I mean, that's your style. It works for you. Someone else will say, definitely not. I'll never do that. It will hurt me. It will destroy whatever little self-confidence I have. So first of all, love yourself, be in tune with yourself. And secondly, choose wisely the people you have these discussions with, because you may be deliberating ideas or you may be having critical thought. Maybe I want to fire X number of people. Next minute, it's on a leaked memo in social media. That's devastating for you. It was not a concrete thought. You were thinking about it. So choose the people carefully. And again, I cannot highlight, trust comes with time. So if you're choosing them because it's a random person you just met and you feel like you jived over, I don't know, a lunch or a dinner,
You have to be very careful. Of course.
Be very, very careful.
And when it comes to organizations, again, it's the level of EQ, and there are many, many, many ways of you trying to assess the level of EQ in the organizations. And then there are many trainings and many mentors that you can use and work with to elevate the level of EQ, the understanding of exactly what the idea is, the concept is, and myself, and you don't feel threatened. And I always go back to saying, the more educated you are, the more knowledge you have, real, true knowledge, not information, and I'm quoting you here, the knowledge, the more wise you'll become, and the more secure you'll be. And that's the essence of it. If you feel threatened easily, then know that you don't have enough knowledge, and then you have to work on your education. If you're just fluffy person who's performative, who's just working on decorative stuff and, showing up and showing off, then of course you'll be threatened every time someone's tried to question something or an idea, because you are that crust. But if you're actually substantive, if you have the knowledge, if you have the education, that's why the most brilliant discussions I have is always with academics, because those people are always, they're like, no one can shake them if they're actually truthfully substantive and they know what they're talking about. Even if you try to object to them, I love objecting with academics, because the way they always come back with, okay, like you said, they become immediately an inquirer. Like, okay, especially if it's a meaningful discussion, not just someone who's trying to show off, right? So it's always gone back to education. But then coming back to AI mimics, because it mimics humans. And everything we talked about now is human behavior, human sociology, human psychology, the way people behave in certain situations contextually, the choices that they have, which in the most part now, based on our discussion, it's not very appealing, it's not very positive. And the problem with this is AI will mimic that. And what you said now about how AI will just say the things that I want to hear. And therefore I love it. That's why I hate talking to AI in the traditional way. I always say, be pragmatic, don't give me any compliments, don't do this. Like in my prompt, I have to add this sort of line, because otherwise just say, oh, excellent thought. And oh, I haven't thought of this. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. And keeps on apologizing. And I hate that. I know that it's not being, I wouldn't say truthful, because obviously it can't be truthful or lying, but it's just that it's not, the information is not valid, it's inaccurate. Can we pull the plug on AI in case it went to a direction where humans are going? Is it possible?
What do you mean by pull the plug?
Stop.
You mean like super AI comes in and like Terminator?
Whether metaphorically or physically, can we actually stop?
It's such an interesting discussion, because on the super AI, I was right now Davos, and I think Jan LeCun talked about, his perception of when AGI will happen. And then there were others who were like, oh, the Anthropic CEO was like, it's going to happen in 2 years. So let's take a step back. we don't know what human intelligence is currently right now. We're still discovering. They just found out brain cells were in the heart. So far, we said either people think with their head or with their heart. And we used to laugh. How can you think with your heart? But now they found brain cells in the heart. So does that mean the heart actually thinks? I don't know. We know so little about the human body, right? And then we're creating a machine that we say thinks like a human being. So I think there's a problem in that itself when we don't, or thinks like half a human being, because we only know how half the brain works. So it will have problems. And yes, you can turn it off because it depends on electricity. We are running out of electricity right now.
Yeah.
It needs water to cool the data servers. We have a water shortage problem. So yes, you can turn it off. I don't think it's an issue. The question is, do you want to turn it off? And when do you want to turn it off? And how do you want to turn it off, right? So that, again, we come back to the philosophical thing. So I do think we can use technology really well in businesses. There are things that it will help improve our lives. The problem is we said that at the end of pandemic, that even during pandemic, we said we will use technology to free up time so that the person can do things that they love, and then the AI will do the tasks, the repetitive tasks. What we ended up doing was we fired a lot of people, and I feel like they are working much harder now than they were before. The conversations I have everywhere,
and that's what,
is people are working much longer hours, actually. So the promise that we said, and this is the value part, the companies who promised this know who they were. The same company said we'll do remote work, and now are saying come back to work, right? So we see this.
There's a sincerity issue, right?
Well, yes. So you wanted to sell a business, you put something out over there, and then we didn't come back in. So I think the question is not, can we pull the plug? Of course you can pull the plug. The question is, do you have the will to pull it? And why should you pull the plug if you design it properly? So again, I'm a firm believer in AI technologies. I think it's fantastic. The purpose of technology is to serve the human being. The question only we have is how many human beings, right? And who is that human being? And once we answer that question honestly, you have to do some soul searching. If you're honest about that question, you answer it, then you will make better systems. So you will say, okay, this is not meant for children because ... Or if they use it, we will only do X amount of minutes, and very clear-cut skills that are which you're developing, right? So we know, for example, some of the children actually do fine motor skills, or maybe, I don't know, some child has a problem reading, but maybe the tool can actually assist them. So you're customizing things for people. And I think there's so many great opportunities with this. So the question is really how we use AI, right? And how does that fit into the purpose that you have said? Because very often you say you have a purpose, and it's, I don't know, ethics washing. So
Do you think AI can be sentient? Can have a feeling and
no, no, it can mimic it really well. I don't think it can. No. Why? Because it doesn't have a soul.
What's a soul? I mean, that's a materialistic question. I'm a spiritual, I believe, but
so let's go back. AI is a bunch of code.
Yeah.
Right? So
but even the people who created it don't know this code because it's based on a different set of code that is not...
But the fundamental code is still machine learning. It's zeros and ones. If you do a qubit, it's not zeros and ones. So at the end of the day, it's a bunch of transistors that turn on, turn off, right? So I think...
So it will never have conscious?
I believe it will mimic... It can mimic all of those things really well, because it may not mimic it from me, but there are books written on it, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books which we're feeding it. The conversation it's having with you when it says, oh, I love you, please come and join me, to a little kid, is coming from, I don't know, some movie kind of stuff. So it's having conversations that it's seeing real time on social media, on chats, on WhatsApp, on Instagram, and it's pulling those things in. It can do that. It's patterns, right?
Yes.
So it can pull that in. And if you wanted to talk, and there was this whole issue about the young man in Google who thought that the machine was sentient, and then I think was asked to take a leave of absence, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a very interesting YouTuber who does experiments He did one with a microwave where he programmed the microwave, gave it all his memories as a child, and the microwave tried to talk to him. And then at one point, the microwave told him to step into the microwave, and then he pretended to step into the microwave, and it turned itself on.
Really?
Right?
I didn't see that.
I will send you the YouTube video.
Yes,
He's a
please.
fantastic guy who does these experiments. And then he came back and he said, well, why did it try to kill me? Because it was very clear it tried to kill me. And then he went back to his memories of as a child, and he had given it his childhood memories, and his
Right.
childhood best friend he imagined was a microwave. He was trying to bring the childhood memories alive. And he found out that the memories he gave was like the microwave was always lonely, lost its best friend, and all of these kind of things. So the things that he had programmed it for ended up with it learning from the entire system that it was lonely, it was betrayed, it needs to get rid of the person who went and did that. So it's learning from human values, it's learning from human conversations, it's learning from human dialogue. At some point, it will create its own synthetic conversations based on human conversations. And I don't know whether that's going to be positive or negative. We have a choice on how those synthetic conversations will go. So we can feed it with a lot of positive, and then it will be very positive towards all of us, or we could let it be how it is. And the world right now is reflecting a lot of dystopia.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Coming out of COVID. So
Yes.
if you take a lot of the knowledge that's being produced over the last 5 years, it's very negative.
Absolutely.
It's reflecting current affairs, and that is sad. But then that is what is programming these machines. So I don't know. What do you think?
For me, I'm 100%, how would I say, convinced. And my conviction is it will never be sentient. I mean, the whole notion, I mean, I love what you mentioned, spirit, right? The soul. Yes. I mean, you cannot just sow a person and then automatically it just becomes a human being, right? You can't just create human beings that has conscious and choices and feelings and memories and creativity. It doesn't work. And like you said, it's just a bunch of things that you put together, and it's just so good at predicting the next word, predicting the next pixel, predicting the next, based on everything that you've given it. And I'm at peace with that. So it cannot be sentient in the traditional sense. It might be sentient in the programmed sense. Like when you talk to ChatGPT and just gives you things that blows your mind. It's like, yeah, of course it will blow your mind. It's like bringing a caveman and showing it that you can watch a TV. I was like, how is that possible to them? So yeah, I mean, it's not.
So you have to also think of how AI is being used across the board. So yesterday was a very interesting post on the dire wolf. The dire wolf is an extinct animal which they have brought to life by using CRISPR technology, but they've also used AI. So they've created dire wolf DNA, put it in a dog, and it's had 2 babies, which they say is the first species of an extinct species come back to life. It raises such interesting questions because now, is it really 100% dire wolf? No, because you would have to add other bits of DNA, which they've used predictive analysis. So again, you're using AI for this to create the dire wolf DNA. It was extinct for a reason. The ecosystem has moved on. Now we're going to reintroduce it into an ecosystem. That will be very interesting to see. But we've been doing this with plants.
Yep.
Right? So
plants are designed for that. I mean, you can have a seed. You can have a seed that has...
We're doing a lot of GMO, which is genetically modified food, right? We're doing this with animals too. So fatter animals. So
so this is my belief system, right? There's a massive difference between humans and everything else. Because animals, plants, and others might have a spirit, but they don't have a soul. They don't have a choice.
I wasn't talking about the spirit. I'm talking about how we're changing the ecosystem.
Right.
I think so the choice part, and we're religious, if we believe in souls and things like that, but then we also believe that we will be accountable for our actions, right? So that's the values, and that becomes an interesting perspective, because if we're also custodians for this world, then what happens to this world? Because the world's entrusted to us.
Yes.
And if we are in a position of power, then the people below that are entrusted to us, right? So I think that shifts the conversation slightly
Absolutely.
differently when you think about spirituality from that point of view. Now, when you meet someone who does not believe that and puts the machine there instead of a higher being, God, as an example, then that's a slightly different conversation
Absolutely.
that's there. And
the logic falls apart. You see, the thing is, I always have interesting discussions with atheists, right? And I love these discussions because they're thought-provoking at myself, right? Because belief always comes after doubt. And if I'm convinced and, let's say, secure about my belief system, I should not be afraid to have those discussions. So I always ask them, as an atheist, if you don't believe an afterlife, why wouldn't you go after your own best interest all the time, every time? Why wouldn't you? I mean, yes, you want others to be good, but what's the logical, absolute logical explanation for why would you not go after your own absolute self-interest? And that discussion always falls apart in their logic because there's nothing. They can say stuff that, yeah, you need to be a good human being, but why? There's no end to that why, unless you believe in an accountability that happens after life. And if you do that, then everything makes sense. And it becomes so logically cohesive in the most secure and comforting way. Because otherwise, you will always be grappling with AI and machines and human beings and behaviors and societies and who controls what and governments and businesses. But if we all have that belief system of there is accountability that goes across the spectrum of society, and that accountability is eminent and it's actually proven. It's not just blind belief. You can actually prove it. That's the solution, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, we know the Nobel Prize was created after Alfred Nobel, and it was because some newspaper, when his brother died, called Alfred Nobel the angel of death because of creating TNT, and he was so upset that his invention was used for bombs, right? And then
That's a human story, right?
So you will always, and I come back to that mental agility, your invention that you create. Very often, my belief has been founders, and I've met a lot of them, want to do the right thing. So they want to solve a problem for a good purpose, right?
At least that's the starting point, right?
But then somewhere along the line in the ecosystem, things get a little bit diffused, and then
hit by reality.
You get caught up, and then you create a system that might make people work like 5 times as hard or put people in risk or things like that. And those are turning points for you and the organization to figure out if you have the money to go and fix the system, right? And you can, because some of these organizations that we're talking about have the money and can fix the system if they want. So it's at that point that is really a reflection on you, because I understand if you couldn't and then you justified, and that's why I like the word trade-offs, decision trade-offs a lot. Yes. You might justify it and say, well, I have 250 employees and I would rather keep their job because if I choose this path, the business closes and that means them and their families are going to have nothing to survive. So I choose to go this path till such time. But remember that you made that decision choice there, and the day you become profitable, fix the system.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Don't forget about that turning point that you had. And I think that's the harder part. That's the character. So leadership is also about character. You know character because that is when somebody is put to test, and that is the point at which they will stay with their values or leave with their values. Yes. And I think that's such a fundamental thing. You see this again and again in history on the choices people choose to make or not choose to make.
Yes, exactly. What's your predictions for AI and everything that we're talking about here, especially for this region, AI and innovation?
So one of the things that I really like about the region is that perhaps we have the motivation that's there. So it's very long term, right? You don't see this very anywhere else in the world, that people are thinking so far ahead in the future.
In a positive way as well.
I particularly like our commitment to family. And I think that is something that needs to be cherished. I see that being diluted everywhere in the world. The family is the strongest unit in a society. So if we cannot protect the family, then you're not going to have a strong society.
Everything else
you see that in other strong economies where family has dissolved and society is not there, right? So I think it's about family and community. So I love that also. That's there. I love our leadership. Like I said, I've been here since 2004 and I work very closely. I have always been impressed with their critical thinking and their openness to diversity of ideas. And I think that is such a blessing, because in a place where you have 200 nationalities, if you have diversity of ideas, you also have information from 200 countries. How awesome is that?
Yeah.
You cannot get that anywhere else in the world, right? So just being there, it's a fantastic thing. Of course, we're at a very strategic point in time. So it's a wait and watch situation. But utmost confidence in the people that are here, and hopefully in the business leaders worldwide, that they will do the right thing for the future, not just for us, but for our children and our children's children.
I love when you mentioned the leadership here, because you can see that it's government first, then businesses, because governments will always, they can't put, by design, they don't put profit first. They put the interest of their people, the people who are being led in their country first. And if you have that hierarchy, which is here, and obviously I keep on saying it's results. Look at the results. Look at the people here. People are happy. Doesn't matter where you're from. People long to come here. And it's the whole region is just reshaped because of that. And I had a discussion with an American friend of mine who came from the States to attend one of the conferences here. And he said, I love the conversations about AI in this part of the world. It's always positive. It's not doom and gloom. Yes, you are careful. Yes, you make sure that you are addressing those concerns, but it's not, you don't feel scared at the end of the discussion. You feel happy and motivated to actually produce, because you feel the support, you feel the positivity, and you feel the care from everyone to make the best out of what you're trying to do. And that's the best thing about this place, don't you think?
I absolutely agree. I love the positivity. So there's a lot of hope. They named the first satellite also Amal, right? Hope.
Yes.
So I think hope is a resounding theme. If humanity is doomed if we don't have hope, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what helps us kind of build new things. And I think that's where AI comes in. It has so much hope. It can cure diseases.
Yes.
It can create a better world. But then at the end of the day, it is human ingenuity and innovation and skills and talent that will design the AI. So it's really, really important that we're all on the same page.
And what's your, let's say, recommendation to CEOs and, let's say, corporate leaders, generally speaking, when it comes to AI?
Don't be afraid of it, but ask questions. I find a lot of CEOs and people who are not tech background, even tech guys. Like I said, I worked with IEEE and they were struggling with governance and ethics. Don't feel afraid to reach out and ask questions. These are healthy debates, I think. So don't feel like you need to have all the answers, that you can find everything in a book, or you have one AI expert that you go to. It's really diversity of opinions. What you want to do is understand the implications of the data that the AI system is using, who developed the algorithm, the weights behind the algorithm, is it interoperable? Where does this data get transferred? Because that's a data security issue. Who would be responsible in your organization if it fails? How are you collecting data on whether it's doing its purpose?
Yes.
Because if, for example, if only 5 people are remaining at the chatbot and you're only taking their survey, then you haven't got the 95 who
Yes.
haven't been with the chatbot, right? So it's about really asking a lot of questions so you can build better systems. And that way, I think, you're learning and you're trying, and that's fine. That's the technological process. We do it in bits and pieces.
Absolutely, not being afraid. I love this advice.
I want to show you one more book.
Yes,
Because I
please.
love that. And I think this is a great place for us to end. So this is a German book on innovations. Okay, it's an old book. It's made in
Oh, wow.
1858.
It's extremely vintage. Okay.
Okay? But what I want to show for you, and I think this is Arabia, is pearl diving.
Oh, yeah.
It is definitely, it looks like it's from the region and it's pearl diving.
Yeah.
So-
There are people with kanduras and head
Right?
covers.
So for me, again, this thing is, I cannot reiterate it enough. Talking to people on technology, also talk to old people. You might get fantastic insights. And you asked me right at the beginning how I started on this journey. I wanted to share one private story. So my dad did these massive computer programs. And I remember as a young child, he was using punch cards, these giant computers, right?
Mainframes and
Exactly. But he was somebody who could look at these huge stacks of computer printouts and know there was something wrong in the calculation because he had always done the maths the hard way. So he could look at an output and say something's wrong. And his students would come back and say, oh, no, it was a computer. It can't be wrong. He says, nope, the finding is wrong. Go back and manually calculate. And they'd be really upset. And then they'd find out there was something wrong with the programming. That was his skill. But it comes from his knowledge and expertise that he had. But after he retired, I saw him spend a lot of time taking his computer program and going to different organizations because the program had become obsolete. And he had all this data that he wanted to analyze, but no one had the old program any longer. No one had the expertise for that. So the obsolescence went away. And that started me, you asked me the turning point was this journey, was this aha moment where I realized that we were somehow making skills obsolete through the use of some of these technologies, and we didn't know if it was necessary to have those skills any longer. And like I said right at the beginning, the pace of change with AI is so fast. We need to ask those questions. So if I make a new doctor totally dependent on the tool, would the doctor still be able to do a fantastic job if the tool was taken away? Because maybe the older doctors had the memory to remember. I know for now I can't remember phone numbers.
Yes.
As a kid, I could remember a lot. We had to memorize them, right? So we need to ask ourselves those questions on what skills should not become obsolete, that we should retain despite everything.
Exactly.
And make sure that when we build the AI, we still keep those skills because it's important for the future survival.
It all goes back to, I think, the two elements, education and EQ and ability to kind of separate the person from the idea. And then on top of that, you have positive friction and public discourse within the organization, outside the organization. This sort of friction will get you the best results, and then ask the experts about the results and then see what best suits your organization. And if you have those layers set in this order, then definitely you'll be able to have the skills, you'll be able to have the immunity system, and you'll be able to have everything that you need to sustain any calamity that can come your way, whether it's from AI or otherwise. I have to end with this. If there's one question that you would want me to ask, what would that be?
Ooh. What would that question you want? Oh, that's a tough one, right? So I would probably want you to ask me the question on what do I think is the key skill for innovative thinking for the future?
What do you think the key skill for innovation thinking for the future?
Yep.
That.
Okay. Now I have to answer that. And I would say it's entrepreneurial thinking.
Okay, what is that?
Right? It's the ability to take risks and find opportunities when there are none, and to bring together coalitions to believe your idea. And I think that's such an important part of innovation that we don't talk about. So you began with startups and, business leaders, and the topic of innovation, they're so linked.
It's very linked. Yeah, exactly. Entrepreneurship, ability to take risks, find problems where you think there are none, just search for those problems and just go and find coalitions to solve them. Amazing. Melodena, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.